Hey guys, how's it going? So, the new balance patch update was just shown off. We get one every 2 months, and I was looking forward to it. I was thinking, there's a lot of characters that could use a touch-up, and, when they showed it off, I thought this was a pretty good lineup of characters. So, first of all, 3 ML5s that really needed changes. Dark Corvus, he's always kind of crummy. Briar, Iseria really fell off for quite a while now, definitely needs some changes. And Astromancer Elena was dead on arrival, terrible, terrible character. Now she's getting a buff, finally. I guess it hasn't been that long, though. Spez finally gets a buff. People have been asking for this for an eternity. Yufine gets a change, which I think could be kind of cool. She's decent in PvE, but in PvP she's kind of useless. Celine, I was happy about that. I like the character a bunch, and she's a little janky to use sometimes, so I thought that was good. And Camilla's actually already pretty good in PvE, so to get a buff is kind of nice for her. Now, the artifacts, Samsara Prayer Beads, terrible artifact. Really needed a change, so that was good to see. Celestine, okay, a touch-up could be good. Most people use Rod of Amaryllis. Andre's Crossbow, one of the worst artifacts ever. Definitely needed some sort of change. And then they also have this interesting thing. So, something they're doing in this balance patch is they're making it so that if an attack hits, it automatically crits with these characters. So, Martial Artist Ken's counter, Yuna's S1, Charlotte's S1 and S3, Shuri, Irons, and Melanie, whatever attack it is. If it says that it always crits, that means if you hit them, it ignores anti-crit completely and will always crit. So it's a buff, right? It helps them a little bit against anti-crit like Senya or the anti-crit buff. So let's talk about Dark Corvus. They made it so his S1 has a 100% chance to provoke. He's immune to stuns completely, and his cooldown for his S3 is -1 turn. You might look at this and say, okay, that's it? Is that really that great? Well, here's how I look at it. More consistency on his S1 is nice. In the current meta, a character like Dark Corvus is theoretically good against some of these stall comps or like really slow teams or teams with evasion units and stuff like that. Except you don't really see him because he just gets hard CC'd over and over. If an opponent picks something like Solitaria or all these other units like Arrowell, they can just keep stunning him when he needs to use a skill. This makes it so you could actually run him against a control team with characters like Solitaria and things, and he'll still be able to use his ability. If your opponent isn't able to silence him or sleep him or something like that, then it'll be much harder for them to deal with him. So I could actually possibly see him working in some of those setups. I think it adds a little bit of viability to him with that. And he's able to use his S3 a little sooner, which is always nice. I'm not sure if this is going to make a huge impact, but he's definitely a better character, and it'll be a little bit helpful, I think. Briar, Iseria. So they changed this part of her passive, so she always had a successful attack deals extra damage, right? And now they took it off her passive, put it on her S1 and S3 separately. Now her S2 has 50% hit chance. Thank God, if you have something like Symbol or Misha on, you'll have a 70% chance to hit, which hits all evasion units at 100% accuracy. And allies and enemies can't revive. This is something I really like. Allies and enemies can't revive. I like having a downside to a powerful ability. Now, this isn't something super crazy, but imagine if a character like Belian made it so you and your opponent can't get souls. I think that would be better for the game, personally. So it's cool to see them actually have a downside on an ability like this, and I hope they do it a little bit more often to make it so you actually have to think about some of these insanely powerful effects that they could add, potentially. So I like the idea of that. And it also makes it so you're good against Destina, made Chloe, I mean Arby, but he's already kind of dead, right? Characters like Mercedes won't revive, things like that. It's pretty useful, I think, to have. It's not a crazy thing, but it definitely helps a nice amount, even ML Celine, for instance. But you have to keep in mind, this is not extinction. If they die and they can't be revived, and then they kill Iseria, they can revive their units after, so you have to keep that in mind. And then now on her S3, they're changing this. No more increased damage, so her S3 in total, I guess, does less damage if you were always soul burning it. But now you can ignore effect resist, which is great. And now instead of attack down, it's chance to decrease defense. So they're changing her to be a much more aggressive character. She has a 100% chance to hit these evasion units pretty much, and then you also will have something like defense break, means she can just completely slaughter Aiden and Remnant Violet, which are very popular units at the moment. So I think that's pretty strong. She might be used in cleave and aggro teams, actually. I mean, she sets up the team perfectly with decreased defense and stripping their buffs, so she could actually be a really good character. We might see a lot more of her, especially since she beats some of the most meta characters, which are evasion characters at the moment. Astromancer Elena. So, this character was terrible. They had no identity, their skills made no sense together, no rhyme or reason. So they pretty much consolidated what she's supposed to do. It made her a lot more effective at it. I think she's going to be really strong. So first of all, they gave her a buff that gives her 15% attack and crit damage. And while she has this buff, your opponents cannot counterattack. She starts the battle with it. When an ally attacks all enemies, does an AoE ability, then she activates her S2, which gives 10 souls and pushes her up 20%. So you don't have to build her super fast. And if you use something like Flan's artifact, for instance, she'll get 10 more souls and push her up an extra 20%. That's a 40% push and 20 souls. That's better than Book. That's actually really good right there. As long as you can activate this, you just have to AoE your opponent one time. And cleave setups can definitely do that, or aggro as well. Then next. So, your opponent isn't able to counterattack while she has the buff, so now she doesn't put the debuff on opponents, which I think is a more eloquent way of doing it. However, I think it might be kind of bad design, because having a buff that just says, this is undispellable, you can't counterattack, kind of stupid, right? I think that's not really good design, that it just has no counterplay or mechanics to it. It's just literally you can't counterattack, but oh well. Her S3 now is an increased cooldown. It gives her that buff again for 2 turns, so she starts with it, then she uses it, then she has it for 2 more turns, so your opponent is not counterattacking until she dies most of the time, right? And now she puts on healable instead of this unable to counterattack buff, or debuff. But they took away the hit chance. That's fine, because that wasn't really part of her identity. It's okay to remove that. She's a way better character as a whole. She was terrible before. So I think it's fine to take away something like the extra hit chance to just make her work a little bit better. And you have to keep in mind, her soul burn is also ignores effect resist, which is really good. So she can generate 20 souls for herself, ignore effect resist, apply all this stuff. It's pretty useful, I think. I think she might see a lot of play in aggro cleave, possibly. You can really set her up easily with, she has a 40% push, so you could build her only like, I don't know, 180, 190 speed or something, and she's instantly going to take the next turn if you AoE. I think that's pretty good. You can build her really high damage. So I think she might see a lot of aggressive play. I don't know how good she's actually going to be. I looked at her damage numbers. They're kind of bad, but you can build her such high damage at a lower speed that it might make up for it, and she might be pretty strong. Because Restrict is also pretty powerful. We'll have to see, though. Now, here's one of the problems, though. She was released. She was terrible. Nobody pulled for her. And then they immediately buff her. That's kind of messed up, isn't it? Like, most people are not going to pull for this character unless they're a whale or they just got lucky or something. And then they just didn't get the character and they immediately get buffed, and now what if they want them? What if she becomes one of the most meta units in the game? I think that's a really screwed up thing, and I think they either should spend more time developing some of these characters, or they should buff them during their banner, because otherwise, so many people get screwed over by that, so I really hope they don't do this again. Says, easiest way to explain this is they moved his Encroach passive onto his S1 and S3, which is if they're 50% health or below after you attack them, you do an AoE after. They increase the damage on it. And now his passive is kind of like Tempest Surns without the CR push. He can't die in one hit, he has to be hit twice, and now he stealths after, but he doesn't get a CR push. And then his S3 does some more damage. And extincts. I don't know if this is really going to make him good. People have been waiting for a buff for him for a long time. Realistically, most of the time Spez was never going to be attacked. Like, most people would probably lose if their Spez was getting attacked. Like, you're usually using him in a cleave setup or some really aggressive setup, so I don't really know how important this is that he doesn't die in one hit. He doesn't have any sort of cleanse or anything either. It's a little bit weird. If the damage don't increased is enough, maybe we could see him used in some comps, but it has to be something really aggressive. I think it's a really strange buff that they actually designed for him. We'll have to see him in action, but I'm not very convinced that this is actually going to be all that good. So, I guess we'll have to see. Yufine. So, it's a little bit weird, but they made it so her S2 doesn't give speed buff anymore, it gives her defense buffs, sort of a bruisery type of thing. They made it so her soul burn extends the buff durations and gives an extra turn. So what she does is she silences all enemies, gives herself attack buff and defense buff when you soul burn it. And then her S3 now does a bunch of damage, and if they're silenced, penetrates 70% defense. So you soul burn with her, and then you S3, and you're supposed to just instantly kill something, I guess. And she buffs herself, so self-sufficient, that's kind of nice. But the problem is you need 20 souls, so that's kind of expensive. And when the skill is available, so S3 is available and not on cooldown, if an ally attacks a silenced enemy, she gets pushed 20%. Kind of interesting. So if you use somebody like Zio to S3 and then you attack that character after, then she would get a CR push. Kind of interesting, but a little bit weird, right? Also, if you kill somebody with this ability, it resets its cooldown, which is kind of cool. I don't know how useful this is really going to be in the end, but I think it's a very interesting addition to her skill set. She's definitely going to be doing more damage, I guess, if the opponent is silenced, so that could be kind of useful, but I'm not sure how applicable in PvE this is. It seems like they're trying to gear her a little more towards PvP, but I'm not sure if she could really work as a bruiser there. So maybe some sort of cleave or aggro setup, a little bit odd. You're going to notice that I'm saying a lot cleave and aggro, because a lot of these buffs feel like they're geared more towards that playstyle than something slow. Celine. So her S2, unaffected by elemental disadvantage, so you can hit a fire unit just fine. That's nice. And her S3 ignores damage sharing, and also does more damage when you soul burn it. I would say overall it's good, so if a fire unit like Iseria or something activates, then she can actually hit the unit and kill it. But, I don't know, it doesn't ignore damage sharing on her S2 anymore. Now the damage sharing ignoring is on her S3, but I'm not really sure how good her S2 is going to be with that then. I don't know how I feel about this. I feel like maybe they could have done something else to make her a little bit better. I would say it's a buff, but it's just not really anything to write home about. I'm not sure if this is going to suddenly mean that she's being used all over. I feel like she has more problems than that. Like, your opponent can kind of ignore her a lot of the time, or just not use a non-attack skill and then wipe your team anyways, because she often won't do much. Camilla. Now she gets an extra turn on her S3 instead of combat readiness. Okay, better in PV. That's nice. It'll help with, I don't know, 80s or Ancient Inheritance or anything like that. It's useful. Nothing special, though. If she gets a, I don't know, special change in the future, maybe it'll matter more. Samsara Prayer Beads. This is actually a pretty cool change. You now do 10% extra damage with single attacks, and when attacked by a single attack, you take 8 to 16% less damage. That's pretty good. On some characters, such as maybe Shu or something like that, that's pretty strong, doing 10% extra damage, and then also just taking less, even if your anti-crit works. So I think that's a pretty good change. It's not something like absolutely insane, but it's just another warrior artifact that's pretty decent. There's so many decent warrior artifacts though, and none that are on the level of like book and stuff, so it's just added to the pile, but it seems like a solid artifact overall. I might level one up and possibly use it on somebody such as Shu. I'll try it out. Celestine. This is the most mystifying change. It honestly doesn't really make much sense to me. They just made it so that attacking with a single attack heals rather than a basic attack, which is S1. So I guess Ning Ning's S2 now heals. That's like it. Like, there's a few abilities like that, like Rin's S2, but this is just a trash change. Just, I don't really know why they did it, unless a character is coming out soon that this will actually apply to. Honor's Crossbow. It's now a better Oath Key. Increases hit chance and effectiveness by 20%. Oath Key only gives the hit chance. Okay, it's a little bit better. But it's really just a substitute artifact for something like Misha or, you know, some artifact that gives extra hit chance. I'm not a huge fan because I don't really like settling for less. I'm the type of person that would just use a totally different artifact rather than using a lesser version of another one. So I'm not the biggest fan of Andre's Crossbow change. And then this is where they talk about the system of adjustments. So characters like martial artists can. Successful attack always results in a critical hit. So if you don't miss the attack, you will always crit, even if they have anti-crit. So these characters are slightly buffed by that, but it's not really that big of a deal. All in all, that's the balance patch though. What I would say in summary is I think Briar, Iseria, and Astromancer Elena are getting pretty big buffs, and we might see a lot of them coming up. I think that the changes are more geared towards an aggressive aggro or cleave playstyle, and I think they seem really good. People are asking me like, oh, should I pick up Briar, Iseria from the Moonlight Selector, the headhunt thing, right? And I don't know, she's not out yet, so I wouldn't jump the gun too hard, and you have time to decide, right? I think Dark Corvus' change, you know, it helps him a little bit. I don't know if we're going to see a ton of play from him, though. I'll try him out in RTA to see what it's like, though. Says I'm unconvinced by it. I'll have to see it in action, but I feel like it's not going to do a lot, and they're just buffing him for the sake of buffing him. Yufine, we'll have to see how much damage it's doing, but it seems like it might do a hefty amount, and she could be kind of fun. I know people like the character a lot, so maybe this change will make her a little bit viable in PvP. Celine makes her slightly better in PvP. Not really too much functional change, but she's just a little more secure, I guess, to use her. Camilla is whatever, slightly better. Absurd Prayer Beads, it seems like a decent artifact now. Celestine, no change. Andre's Crossbow, better Oath Key, but nothing special. So that's kind of what I would say about the entire balance patch. I think as a whole, I think it's decent. I think it's a decent one. You add a few characters to the meta. It might shake things up a little bit, especially with so much evasion stuff so prevalent. Cleave and aggro teams get a couple more tools that might tip the balance in their favor in some of these matches. And all in all, I think it seems pretty fun, some of these characters actually being able to be used again. So that's pretty much it for this, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you guys next time.